Before bug spray existed, every farm family grew these container plants that repel mosquitoes. Many have forgotten them. There was a woman on our street, older, retired, with a porch that faced west and caught the full heat of the evening sun. I didn't think much about it as a child. I just knew that on summer evenings, when the whole neighborhood was swatting and scratching, the people who ended up on her porch seemed to have a better time of it. There were no candles burning, no sprays, no coils, just an old wooden glider, the sound of crickets, and these big clay pots she kept clustered along the railing. A neighbor asked her about it once. She just smiled and said, "The plants know how to take care of us. We just have to let them." She had learned it from her mother. Her mother learned it from hers. Farm families, going back well before any of us were born, didn't run to a store for a can of bug spray. They grew what they needed. They kept it on the porch, near the door, along the windowsill. It was just something many people knew. And then, somehow, much of it got lost. In 1956, the American chemical company S.C. Johnson launched a major advertising campaign for their new aerosol DEET-based repellent. Within a decade, it was in homes across the country, and many of the plants that farm families had relied on for generations, the ones that had been kept on porches and windowsills for as long as anyone could remember, quietly faded from common use. Not because they stopped working, but because a generation grew up reaching for a product instead. Today, I want to give some of that knowledge back. I've spent the last 3 years researching what farm families, homesteaders, and cottage herbalists actually grew before the aerosol can existed. Not folk remedies, not guesswork. Plants with documented chemical compounds that are measurably, scientifically repellent to mosquitoes. Plants that happen to thrive in containers, on porches, along railings and windowsills. Every single plant in this video can be grown in a pot. You don't need a large garden. You don't need a lot of money. You need a container, some decent soil, and something that older woman on my street already knew. Stay with me, because number 7 on this list is the one that stopped me cold when I found it. I had no idea. And once you see it, you'll wonder why it isn't in every garden center display. Before we get into the plants, I want to explain something quickly, because I think it changes how you see everything that follows. Mosquitoes navigate almost entirely by smell. They detect the carbon dioxide we exhale, and they follow a scent trail to find us. What many people don't realize is that certain plants produce volatile organic compounds, natural chemical molecules released into the air, that actively interfere with a mosquito's ability to lock onto that scent trail. This isn't mystical, it's chemistry. A mosquito following you is essentially tracking a scent signal. These plants can interfere with that signal. Compounds like nepetalactone, citronellol, and linalool have been shown in peer-reviewed research to interact with the mosquito's olfactory receptors and disrupt the mechanisms they use to locate a host. A 2011 study published in the journal Phytochemistry found that nepetalactone, the compound in one of the plants we'll discuss today, outperformed DEET in laboratory conditions at equivalent concentrations. The researchers noted their results ranged widely depending on test conditions, but the findings were significant enough to call for further study. Laboratory results don't always translate directly to your back porch, but the underlying chemistry is real. And yet most people have no idea this plant exists outside of the pet store. These plants also don't just repel mosquitoes. Several of them have culinary uses, medicinal histories stretching back thousands of years, and the kind of beauty that makes your porch a place you actually want to sit. They're not just functional. They're a reclamation of old knowledge, old habits, and a way of living in relationship with plants rather than just buying products. Let's get into them. Long times. Catnip, Nepetacateria. The first plant is going to surprise you, because most of us have spent 40 years thinking of this as something you buy for your cat. A novelty, a toy, maybe something a little silly. What the people selling it have never told you is that catnip is, by measured scientific evidence, one of the more well-studied mosquito repellents in the plant kingdom. Catnip, Nepetacateria, contains a compound called nepetalactone. This is the same compound responsible for that famous effect on cats, but its relationship with mosquitoes is entirely different. To a mosquito, nepetalactone appears to act as a strong deterrent. That 2011 study from Phytochemistry I mentioned, it was specifically about nepetalactone. Researchers at Iowa State University, building on earlier work they had published in 2001, found that nepetalactone outperformed DEET in certain laboratory test conditions at equivalent concentrations. It's worth noting these were controlled lab settings, not outdoor field trials, so real-world effectiveness varies. But the chemistry is genuinely compelling. Catnip has been grown in European cottage gardens since at least the 13th century. Some historical records suggest it was planted near doorways, not only for cats, but because generations of observation connected it with fewer biting insects around the home. They didn't know what nepentolactone was, but they knew what it did. Here's how to use it on your porch or patio. Catnip grows beautifully in a container. A 12-inch pot is plenty. It prefers full sun to partial shade, and actually thrives a little dry, which makes it remarkably forgiving if you forget to water for a day or two. Plant it in well-draining soil, give it at least 6 hours of sun, and it will grow to about 2 to 3 feet in a single season. For maximum repellent effect, lightly crush a few leaves with your fingers before you sit outside. That crushing releases nepentolactone directly into the air around you. It's not toxic. It's not a spray. It's just chemistry working the way it's supposed to. You can also dry the leaves and bundle them as a natural sachet to keep near doors and windows. And here's what the gardening centers don't put on the tag. Catnip is also a calming herb for humans. It belongs to the mint family, and a tea made from catnip leaves has been used as a gentle sleep aid and anxiety reliever since the 18th century. It was listed in the United States Pharmacopoeia, the official compendium of medicinal substances, as late as 1950, before pharmaceutical sleep aids pushed it out of common use. It repels mosquitoes. It calms your nerves. It grows in a pot on your porch. And your grandchildren's cats will visit more. Now, catnip might not surprise you much once you know the science. But the next plant on this list is one that almost every gardener over 60 has grown for decades, and has absolutely no idea it was doing double duty the entire time. Plant 2. Lavender. Lavandula angustifolia. You may already have lavender on your porch or in your garden. You grew it for the fragrance, the color, the dried bundles you put in your linen closet. What you may not have known is that every time you walked past it on a summer evening, it may have been helping. Lavender produces a compound called linalool, along with secondary compounds including camphor and 1,8-cineol. Together, these volatile oils create an aromatic environment that mosquitoes tend to avoid. A 2009 study conducted at the University of Lund in Sweden found that linalool showed significant repellent activity against mosquitoes, specifically Aedes aegypti, the species associated with dengue fever, Zika, and yellow fever. Lavender has been planted near sleeping quarters, doorways, and livestock pens since ancient Greece. Roman soldiers planted it along their encampments. Elizabethan households hung it over beds to repel insects and what they called pestilential airs. For 2,000 years, people were doing something that turned out to have a real chemical basis. They just didn't have the vocabulary to say why. In containers, lavender thrives in a slightly alkaline, very well-drained mix. This is a Mediterranean plant, and it hates wet feet. A terracotta pot is actually ideal because terracotta breathes and doesn't hold moisture the way plastic does. Use a sandy or gravelly mix. Place it in your sunniest spot, and you will have blooms from late spring through late summer. For maximum repellent effect, plant lavender in clusters of 3 or more. The combined volatile output of multiple plants creates a more meaningful aromatic presence. Place them near seating areas, not tucked away decoratively. And here is a practical tip that most gardeners over 60 find they were never told. Cut your lavender back by about 1/3 in late summer after its first bloom. It will flush again. An unpruned lavender becomes woody and stops blooming within a few years. A well-pruned lavender container plant can live 15 years or longer. Lavender is also, of course, one of the most studied calming aromas in human neuroscience. A 2015 review in the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine found that linalool, inhaled as a vapor, showed measurable effects on markers of anxiety and parasympathetic nervous system activity, confirming what generations of herbalists had long observed. Sitting near your lavender pots on a summer evening isn't just pleasant. It is, in a real and documented sense, doing something good for your nervous system while making the space less hospitable to the insects that would otherwise be ending your enjoyment. That is an extraordinary plant to have in a clay pot by your chair. Now, lavender is beloved. It's beautiful. Nobody's forgotten lavender. But the next plant is one that quietly fell out of common use in American gardens over the past few generations, replaced in part by container versions of citronella and commercial sprays that do a similar job on the shelf. Before we go further, I want to ask you something. How many of you have a porch, a balcony, or even a sunny windowsill that you're not using right now? Just a spot where a pot could go? Drop a yes in the comments. And if you're watching this from somewhere that gets genuinely brutal mosquito seasons, tell me where. I want to know where you're gardening from. And if you know someone who's been talking about cutting back on chemicals in their yard, someone who's been complaining about mosquitoes all summer, will you share this video with them right now? You don't have to send a message, just share it. Because the thing we talk about next is something not enough people know anymore, and they should. Plant 3. Lemon balm, Melissa officinalis. There is a plant that smells like lemon, grows like a weed, thrives in containers, produces a compound called citronellal, the same aromatic compound associated with citronella's repellent effect, and costs less than $2 to start from seed. Gardeners grew it in pots by the back door for generations. Right now, the citronella candle industry generates over $200 million a year in the United States alone. This plant is called lemon balm, and it's worth knowing what it can do. Lemon balm, Melissa officinalis, produces citronellal as one of its primary volatile compounds, along with geraniol and linalool. When the leaves are crushed or even brushed against, lemon balm releases measurable concentrations of these compounds into the surrounding air. It has been grown in formal European physic gardens since at least the 10th century. Benedictine monks cultivated it as one of their primary medicinal herbs. The great herbalist John Gerard wrote in 1597 that it driveth away all venomous beasts, his 16th century way of describing what we now understand as insect repellent properties. The physician Paracelsus called lemon balm the elixir of life. He may have been overstating it, but he wasn't wrong about the aromatics. Lemon balm is one of the most container-friendly herbs you will ever grow. It spreads aggressively in the ground. Plant it in the earth and it will take over a bed within 2 seasons. But in a container, that aggressive growth works in your favor. You get a full, lush plant quickly, and you can harvest it heavily without worry. Use a container at least 10 inches deep, standard potting mix, and partial to full sun. Water regularly. Unlike lavender, lemon balm likes moisture. Cut it back by half, at least once during the growing season, to prevent it from going leggy and to encourage fresh aromatic growth. To use it actively, brush your hands across the leaves before sitting outside. Rub a crushed leaf on your wrist or ankles. The citronellal transfers directly to your skin, though topical effectiveness fades within 1 to 2 hours, and reapplication is needed. Lemon balm tea is one of the gentlest and most explored natural sleep aids available. A 2011 study published in Phytotherapy Research found that participants who took lemon balm extract reported meaningful reductions in insomnia and anxiety symptoms over a 2-week period. This plant on your porch offers something in the evening, and again when the evening ends. That's the kind of practical elegance that herb gardens used to be built around, and it's worth remembering. Now, I want to spend a moment on the next plant, because this one has a more interesting story. It's a plant that was genuinely common to kitchen gardens across Europe and early America for centuries. And then, quietly, it migrated entirely to the culinary shelf, and its other uses were simply forgotten, not hidden, just lost. Plant 4. Rosemary, Salvia rosmarinus. Here is a plant you probably already own. It's sitting in your kitchen, or near your grill, or on your windowsill right now. And it is, quietly, one of the most useful insect deterrent plants that has ever grown on this continent. Rosemary, recently reclassified by botanists as Salvia rosmarinus, produces camphor, alpha-pinene, and 1,8-cineol. These compounds are not just aromatic. Camphor has been used as an insect deterrent since ancient China. Alpha-pinene has documented effects on insect nervous systems. 1,8-cineol, sometimes called eucalyptol, is the primary active compound in several commercial insect repellents sold in Australia and Europe today. A 2009 study in the journal Parasitology Research found that rosemary oil showed significant repellent activity against larvae of Culex pipiens, the common house mosquito, and several species of biting flies under controlled conditions. Rosemary has been planted near doorways in Mediterranean cultures since the Roman period. Valued for its culinary use, its fragrance, and an empirical observation, accumulated over generations, that biting insects seem to avoid areas where it grew densely. Rosemary in containers is one of the great joys of the over 60 gardener. It is drought-tolerant, slow-growing, long-lived, and increasingly beautiful as it ages. An old woody rosemary plant in a terracotta pot has a sculptural quality that takes years to develop. Use a terracotta pot at least 12 inches wide, very well draining gritty soil, and maximum sun. Rosemary will suffer in shade and rot in wet roots, but give it those conditions and it will live for 10, 15, 20 years. I know gardeners with rosemary plants older than their grandchildren. For maximum repellent effect, place it on your porch railing or right next to your seating area. When you walk past and brush the leaves, camphor and alpha-pinene release into the air around you. You can also lay a few cut sprigs on a warm surface near where you're sitting. The gentle heat volatilizes the compounds more efficiently. Research published in Therapeutic Advances in Psychopharmacology in 2012 found that inhaling rosemary aroma measurably improved speed and accuracy in cognitive performance tests. The compound 1,8-cineol was detected in participants' bloodstreams after inhalation alone. Sitting on your porch near your rosemary plant is, in a documented and measurable way, good for your brain. I want to keep going, because the next plant is one that surprises almost every gardener I've ever shown it to. It looks like an ornamental. It's sold as a decorative annual, and it contains a compound that researchers at the University of Florida studied specifically as a mosquito deterrent for residential properties. Plant 5. Basil, Ocimum basilicum. Basil does not need to be crushed to deter mosquitoes. It does not need to be rubbed on your skin. It does not need anything from you at all. It simply grows, and the compounds it releases into the air as it grows are, by themselves, repellent. Basil produces estragol and linalool as its primary volatile compounds. Unlike most of the plants we've discussed, basil releases these compounds continuously and passively, without any crushing, bruising, or processing. Simply having a healthy, actively growing basil plant near your seating area creates a sustained, low-level repellent presence in the air. A study conducted at the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences tested multiple basil varieties as container plants in outdoor settings and found measurable reduction in mosquito approach behavior near basil plantings. African basil, Ocimum gratissimum, has been used as a mosquito deterrent in sub-Saharan Africa for generations, and its compounds are now under active study by the World Health Organization as a low-cost alternative for communities with limited access to commercial repellents. Grow lemon basil, Ocimum times citriodorum, or cinnamon basil, for a higher volatile compound profile. These varieties have a stronger, more complex aromatic character than standard sweet basil, and tend to release more repellent compounds per plant. Basil thrives in containers in warm weather. It needs heat, sun, and consistent moisture. A single large pot of basil near your door or beside your outdoor chair is functional, beautiful, and completely edible. Pinch the flowers as they form. A basil plant that goes to flower puts its energy into seed production and reduces its aromatic oil output. Keep it in a vegetative, leaf-producing state, and it will perform more effectively all season long. That's worth pausing on. Everything we've discussed so far, plants grown for mosquito deterrence, is also, in most cases, directly edible, medicinally useful, or both. Your mosquito barrier is also your herb garden. Your porch protection doubles as your kitchen. There was a time when those two ideas weren't separate, when the plants that protected you were the same plants that nourished you, and no one had to explain why. That's worth remembering. We are about halfway through the list, and I want to take a breath here. If you've been gardening for decades, if you've been tending a garden for 30 or 40 years, some of what we're talking about today may feel like a homecoming rather than a discovery. Has any of this brought up a memory? A neighbor's garden, a backyard from childhood, a plant someone grew that you haven't thought about in years? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, because that history matters. That knowledge belongs to us. Passed between neighbors, between generations, between people who paid attention to plants. Not to a label, not to a product, to us. And if this is resonating with you, if you feel like this kind of content is worth more of your time, please subscribe. Not because I'm asking for something from you, but because I make one of these every week, and I would hate for you to miss what's coming. Plant 6. Marigolds, Tagetes spp. The last plant most gardeners would ever associate with mosquito control. You've probably grown marigolds as border plants, annuals, cheerful orange and yellow fillers. Maybe you've heard they keep pests away without ever being sure what that meant or whether it was true. It's true, at least in part. And the mechanism is more interesting than most people realize. Marigolds, particularly Tagetes erecta and Tagetes patula, contain compounds called pyrethrins in their flowers, along with thiophene in their foliage. Thiophene derivatives have documented nematicidal and insect deterrent properties. Pyrethrins are natural insecticidal compounds that occur in several plant species and have been used in agriculture for over a century. Here is something the gardening mainstream rarely makes clear. Pyrethrins are the natural compounds from which the synthetic pyrethroid insecticide class was chemically modeled. The industrial versions are laboratory modifications of something that has always existed in nature, including right inside the marigold plant. Marigolds have been planted around homes and sleeping areas in India, Mexico, and East Africa, specifically as insect deterrents for centuries. This wasn't folk superstition, it was observation, passed down, based on results that modern chemistry has since confirmed. For container growing, Tagetes patula, French marigold, is the ideal variety. It stays compact, blooms all season, thrives in a 10-inch pot, and produces a high concentration of repellent compounds for its size. Place marigold containers at the entry points to your porch, at the top of steps, near doorways, along railings. They form a fragrant perimeter that many insects find uninviting. Deadhead spent blooms every few days to keep the plant producing new flowers and maintaining high volatile compound output. Marigold petals are edible and historically used in food. They were grown in Tudor England specifically to add color and mild flavor to salads and broths. The dried petals are still used in Georgian and Persian cooking today. Your mosquito deterrent is also, quietly, a culinary plant. And now we have arrived at number 7. I've been thinking about how to introduce this one, because it's not dramatic in the way you might expect. It has something quieter than that. A story about a plant so ordinary, so present in so many of our lives, that we stopped seeing it. And when we stopped seeing it, we stopped understanding what it was doing for us. Plant 7, lemon thyme, Thymus thymes citriodorus. Lemon thyme grows 4 inches tall. It will fit in a pot the size of a dinner plate. It costs $3 at a nursery, if you can find it, and many nurseries carry limited stock because it doesn't have an impressive visual presence. It is, according to research conducted through Purdue University's Cooperative Extension Service, one of the more effective plant-based mosquito repellents identified in recent years, with topical effectiveness that held up in comparison to low-concentration commercial formulations. Lemon thyme contains a specific compound called thymol, along with significant concentrations of citronellal and geraniol. Thymol has been documented as an insecticidal compound since the early 20th century. It is the active ingredient in several organic certified pesticide products used in commercial agriculture today. The Purdue University research, published through their Cooperative Extension Service, specifically tested the crushed leaf application of lemon thyme against human skin and measured its repellent effectiveness against mosquito species associated with West Nile virus transmission. The researchers found that, applied topically, crushed lemon thyme leaves provided repellency rates of up to 62% in their tests, comparable to low-concentration DEET formulations under the same conditions. Thyme has been used medicinally and protectively in Western culture since ancient Greece. The Egyptians used it in embalming. They understood empirically that thymol inhibited biological degradation. Greek soldiers bathed in thyme-infused water before battle. Medieval European herbalists prescribed it for fevers and bad airs, their understanding of conditions we now associate with mosquito-borne illness. They were growing something useful before they had the science to explain why. Lemon thyme is, without exaggeration, one of the easiest container plants you can grow. It requires almost nothing: a small pot, well-draining soil, full sun, and infrequent watering. It is almost impossible to overcare for. Its main enemy is too much moisture. Plant it in a shallow terracotta pot, 6 to 8 inches wide. Place it on a table, railing, or step near where you sit. Let it grow freely. For active use, crush a small handful of leaves in your hands and rub the oil across your wrists, ankles, and the back of your neck before going outside. Reapply after 90 minutes. This is the kind of practical, hands-in-the-garden approach that older herb traditions were built on. Simple, direct, free. You can also propagate lemon thyme almost indefinitely. Take a small cutting, place it in moist soil, and it will root within 2 weeks. One $3 plant becomes 10 within a single summer. Thymol is one of the most studied natural antibacterial compounds in herbal medicine. A 2006 review in the Journal of Applied Microbiology found it effective against a broad range of bacterial pathogens. The mouth rinse Listerine was originally formulated with thymol, derived from thyme, as its primary active ingredient. Your mosquito deterrent container plant is also, in a literal pharmacological sense, an antiseptic. This is not a folk remedy. This is a long track record, confirmed by peer-reviewed research, growing in a 4-inch pot. Now, I told you at the beginning that number 7 stopped me cold, and I hope it has for you too, not because it's dramatic, but because it's so quiet. Because lemon thyme is just sitting there at most garden centers, looking small and unremarkable, and the label doesn't say any of this. It never will. That's true of almost everything we've talked about today. None of these plants come with a label that tells you what they're actually capable of. The labels say what they're for in the kitchen, or what color they bloom, or how many hours of sun they need. The deeper knowledge, the accumulated, generational, neighbor-to-neighbor knowledge of what these plants do for the people who grow them, that knowledge was never put on a label. It was passed by word of mouth, across back fences and garden gates, between people who had simply paid attention for a long time. And when that word of mouth broke, when gardens shrank, when families moved, when the spray can became easier, much of it just quietly faded. I want to ask you one more thing before we close. Of everything we've talked about today, catnip, lavender, lemon balm, rosemary, basil, marigolds, lemon thyme, which one are you going to put on your porch this season? Not which one might you try someday. Which one are you going to get this week? Tell me in the comments. I'll be there, and I'll respond to as many as I can, especially if you have questions about your specific zone, your specific porch situation, or whether any of these will overwinter in your climate. And if you haven't subscribed yet, every week I bring you something in this space. Plants that have been overlooked, knowledge that was buried, practical growing guidance for people who want to grow beautifully, naturally, and without handing their health to a company that profits from your problems. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Here's what I want to leave you with. That woman on our street, the one with the porch that always seemed a little quieter on summer evenings, wasn't protected because she was especially wise, or because she had some rare knowledge that no one else possessed. She grew what she had learned to grow. She kept the pots where they'd always been kept. She trusted what she'd seen work. She didn't need a study. She didn't need a label. She had something more reliable than either of those things. She had observation, accumulated over time, passed from one person to another, by people who had simply paid attention to plants. We live in an era that has replaced much of that accumulated knowledge with products. Someone took what older generations knew and put it in a bottle and charged you for it, and somewhere along the way, the original, the living, growable, $2 at the nursery original, got left behind. Not forever, but for long enough that most of us forgot to look. I don't think that was inevitable. I think it was just what happened, and I think it can be undone. Here is what I'd encourage you to do this week. Pick one plant from today's list. Just one. Go to your nearest nursery, or order a small plant or packet of seeds online, and put it in a pot near the place where you spend your summer evenings. Water it. Watch it grow. Crush a leaf between your fingers and notice what it smells like. That smell is chemistry. That smell is history. That smell is generations of neighbors and gardeners and quiet observers who understood something we are only now remembering. If you've made it to the end of this video, I want you to know, you are exactly the kind of gardener I make these for. Not someone who needs everything simplified. Someone who wants to understand, really understand, what they're growing and why. I'll see you in the comments, and I'll see you next week.